We begin with breaking news. Lindsay Clancy's defense team is calling for a mistrial in her murder trial. Clancy's lawyer, Kevin Reddington, is alleging misconduct on the part of prosecutors when they asked her mother-in-law whether it was an immoral sin for Lindsay to kill her 3 children. Well, Clancy has pleaded not guilty in the deaths of her children, but doesn't deny killing them. Her lawyers argue she was suffering from postpartum psychosis and shouldn't be held responsible. Now, CBS News correspondent Shanelle Kaul is live in Plymouth, Massachusetts with more on this. So, Shanelle, certainly a lot of new developments today and in just in the last 30 minutes. So break it down for us.
Yeah, you mentioned that testimony with Susan Clancy, that's Patrick Clancy's mother, and Lindsay Clancy's former mother-in-law. That happened about a week ago. Then today, once again, prosecutors called another witness to the stand, a medical expert that was part of their rebuttal here. And during testimony this afternoon, this witness, too, mentioned religion. That's why Kevin Reddington, Lindsay Clancy's defense attorney, said he called for a mistrial today. Take a listen to his explanation of this.
The fact that this is not the first time that it occurred during the trial, and the prosecution has previously brought up the concept of mortal sin, based on your ruling in the past, in conjunction with the fact that they brought it up again, I believe it was intentional misconduct, and I feel that the court should grant the motion for mistrial.
I'm not going to declare a mistrial this time. What I am going to do is I'm going to bring the jury in. I'm going to tell them to disregard it. I'm going to tell them that's an inappropriate area of inquiry and that this witness's understanding of Catholic dogma or Catholic teaching is irrelevant.
So as you heard there, what happened afterwards were the jurors came back in. The judge explained to the jurors very specific instructions that piece of testimony, just like in the Susan Clancy case, that piece of testimony from today that discussed Catholicism would be struck from the record. It would not be included in evidence, and they should not include that testimony in their ultimate decision here about whether or not Lindsay Clancy should be found criminally liable.
Hey, Shanelle, I also wanted to ask you about what's happening outside of the courthouse. Mostly women gathered outside to support Clancy, actually some support and on the other side as well. What are you hearing from them?
I will say a very diverse group of voices. There were probably more than 100 people here that lined up outside the court waiting to go in earlier this morning. Many of them women, most of them women, I'll say. Some of them were wearing pink in support of Lindsay Clancy. Others today were part of a new group wearing white. And those women that I spoke to felt like there wasn't enough attention being paid to the Clancy children. And so they called for justice for those children as well. Here's more.
Empowering to see so many women come together. It's empowering because you can show other women who are suffering in silence that they're not alone and that more awareness is going to be brought to this. It's sad that she cried out for help in so many ways and the system failed her.
They didn't have to die. If she could tell people she wasn't well and thought she'd hurt her babies, she could have brought them to grandma's and said, take care of the babies, I gotta go somewhere to take care of myself, and she didn't. So I really feel that this was premeditated.
Yeah, as you heard there, people obviously have opinions about this murder trial, and they're showing up here in Plymouth to share those opinions, not just in interviews with us. People also showed up with signs on the lawn behind me here, just outside the court. In terms of next steps here in this trial, we're expecting prosecutors to bring one more medical expert, one more witness to the stand as part of their rebuttal before we hear closing arguments. Likely that will happen on Wednesday.
All right, Shanelle Kaul. Shanelle, thank you. I want to bring in CBS News legal contributor Jessica Levinson now. Jessica, today the defense moved to call a mistrial on the grounds that the prosecution referenced religion in their line of questioning, asking witnesses whether murder and suicide were considered a mortal sin. Let's first take a listen to that.
Now, are you an active member in the Catholic Church?
Yes.
So you're aware that murder is considered a mortal sin?
Counsel, could I see you over here?
She was raised as a Catholic, and this, as I understand, Catholic considerations, that's not necessarily what happens. But when I asked her about that, when I said, isn't suicide a mortal sin?
Yeah, I see counsel over here.
So, Jessica, what do you make of the prosecution's comments and the request for a mistrial?
Well, I think what we see is the prosecution wading into territory that the judge acknowledged is more prejudicial than probative, meaning that the question for the jury is not whether any particular witness is Catholic or whether or not they believe that certain actions are a mortal sin. The question for the jury is whether or not Lindsay Clancy can be held criminally responsible. So it's not that any mention of religion is inappropriate. It's not that we can't talk about whether people are religious people, witnesses, or the defendant. It's the issue of potentially introducing a new set of guidelines for the jury. The jury needs to look only at the legal standard, whether you can hold Lindsay Clancy criminally responsible or whether she was unable to conduct herself within the bounds of the law or did not understand what was legal and illegal.
And really at the crux of the defense, Clancy's legal team says that she was suffering from postpartum psychosis and should not be held responsible for her children's murders. But today, a psychiatrist did testify that Clancy had depression, not postpartum psychosis. So what do you make of the conflicting diagnosis?
So what we've heard is there's a lot that's agreed upon in this trial. And one of the things that's agreed upon is that Lindsay Clancy is suffering from serious mental illness. Mm-hmm. But where we diverge is there are different experts for the prosecution versus the defense who differ as to whether or not that mental illness rose to the level of essentially psychosis so that she could not be found criminally responsible under that legal standard that I just detailed, or if she was someone who was suffering from significant mental illness, but still did not fall within that legal standard, that she still understood that what she was doing was wrong and or was able to comport her behavior within the boundaries of the law. I don't think there's any question that she was suffering. The question is whether or not she was, again, able to form that intent necessary where we would find her criminally liable, again, considering the legal standard we keep talking about.
And moving forward, what can we expect during closing arguments?
I think what we can expect during closing arguments is, to follow up on what we were talking about, that there is a lot that's agreed upon in this case. And there's actually a quite narrow question here, whether or not Lindsay Clancy can be found legally responsible. And what we're going to hear from the prosecution is she can be. Was she suffering from depression? Absolutely. But she was engaging in planning activities. She was engaging in the type of activities that indicate that she was not so divorced from reality that we cannot say she is responsible. The defense will say just because she was able to take small steps in terms of planning, asking her husband, for instance, to leave the house, sending him on an errand, that doesn't mean that she wasn't suffering from command hallucinations. That doesn't mean that she wasn't suffering from the type of delusions that would mean she does satisfy that legal standard and she can't be found responsible.
And no doubt, this trial has really gripped the nation on so many emotional fronts. And obviously, it's up to the jury to decide. But it has made national headlines. People flying in to rally outside of the courthouse to support Clancy. How does this sway a jury, or does it?
It's a really important question. And I think the answer is that what happens outside of the courtroom should not affect what's going to happen in that jury box. We have jurors who have been listening to not snippets of conversations or not headlines about the trial, but have been listening to all of the evidence, who will be instructed on the legal standards. And obviously there's so many important issues with respect to our society that are being discussed in this case, but that's not the question for the jury. The jury is not here to settle issues related to the mental health system or issues related to postpartum depression. The jury is there to look at the facts and the law, and not how many people are outside of the courtroom supporting Lindsay Clancy or how many outside of the courtroom who believe that what she did was murder.
Yeah, absolutely. Jessica Levinson. Jessica, thank you.